Hello. Wow. It's a lot more people than I thought it would be, so the pressure is definitely on. If you can't rebuild your complete environment within a given context with one command, I would argue that you can't trust your deploy. That was a phrase I lured you into this room and into this talk, so now it's up to me to try to deliver on that. My goal on this presentation is for you to feel confident, or more confident, that you can achieve exactly that. I will show you how to do it using Pulumi. That's my tool of choice. Also talked about the history and how we got here as an industry. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. I might have a hard time see you without burning my eyes because of the spotlights here. That's fine, you can have the one, but and there will be time for question in the end, I hope. If not, you can just reach me afterwards or on Twitter. First, my name is Tomas Jansson. I've been living here in Oslo for 13 years. I am from Sweden, so I'm severely damaged when it comes to language. I can't speak proper Swedish or Norwegian, and my English is what it is, so you have to bear with me. I currently work at Elkjøp Nordic, and for you who is not from the Nordic, you might not know what Elkjøp do. We are an electronic retailer, the largest one in the Nordic region. We have 400 employees in the Elkjøp Nordic office at HQ, where I work. But in Elkjøp, in total, there are 11,000 employees. I think about 40,000 if we count the franchise. So it's a quite large organization, and we are at HQ are developing both the back office application and also the e-commerce site. I work as a developer, architect, tech lead, and also infrastructure apparently, and that's fun. Everything with code and also organization and architecture, and that's a good stuff. Prior to Elkjøp, I was in a startup where we processed 10 billion events per day, or 10 terabyte data per day, if you like. That was also quite interesting. I also worked as a consultant for 10 plus years here in Nordic, where I started doing automation and building pipelines long before DevOps was a thing. So I have done this for quite some time now. I was part of the developer community for quite a while, and then I had too many kids. I still have kids, but I try to. They are growing up slowly. They are 3, 3, and 7, if you wonder. So I try to be part of the community more these days. Not as much as before, but at least to some degree. I really love to deliver value or help others deliver value, and for that, I also think that you always room for improvement. But for improvement to happen, you also have to have the courage to change, and you also have to challenge status quo, because you won't have any improvement if you don't change. That's how easy it is, at least in my opinion. I don't think everyone agrees, because a lot of people want to have improvements, but if you ask them if they want to change, they will probably say no, and I really don't understand how they can get those two things together. But that's just me. So let's get to the more juicy bits. Here's what I plan to go through. First, some history and reflection on where we are today. Then we'll go into what Pulumi is, and also why I chose Pulumi, at least. Maybe that can help you choose it also if you want to, or something else. Also go through some of the concepts of Pulumi and some different components before putting those things together into some kind of demo afterwards. And hopefully, he's excited. Hopefully there will be time for some questions. So first, I would like to thank Dolly for my pictures. I have not, they are all generated by Dolly, so I have no clue what the thing next to the computer is. I guess that's Dolly's version of a mouse. I've never seen those. I asked for a computer under a desk, and this is what I got. And this was the early days of computing IT. we had our servers, we care for them, we put them under our desk, no one would ever touch them. If you want to install something, you sort of booted it up. Hopefully you had a screen on the desk and not under it, and you can see what happened and install the program. And they're sort of quite fragile computers, I would say. So if something crashed, it was really hard to replicate that. As time went by, we needed more and more machines, and it wasn't feasible to have all machines under your desk. So we have to have server rooms and also virtualization come to place. So this is also a server room according to Dolly, or a messy server room according to Dolly, actually. And with the server room, we sort of, and also virtualization, we created larger machines, and we put all our machines into this machine, virtualized. Initially, we actually did a lot of this management manually still, but there are also virtual machines, but we care to them or care for them manually and have some kind of administration UI. Actually, was an intern at VMware, which was one of the first companies doing virtualization 18 years ago, a long time ago. And I actually was basically on this side then. I had my own server on my desk at VMware where I was working on virtualization, doing QA. But the change from this to the slide before is now we have our machine in a virtualized environment, but we're still like installing things manually. And this is also not feasible long term if you look back. Like we want to have more things installed, more machines and more of everything basically. And it's hard to replicate if you do things manually. So this led to a tidier server room, and we started doing things in an automatic fashion. And that led us to tools like Puppet that it could actually install software on your servers and do it in a way that you can replicate it and do it on many machines over and over again. And you can also maybe create IaC images that you can install over and over. This led to us being able to actually have the much faster deployment and also create many more services. If that's a good thing or not, that's a complete different discussion. I'm not sure you need as many services as we have today, but we definitely need some at least. And then we ended up in the cloud. According to Dolly, this is what the cloud looks like. And now we actually start to care less about the actual computers or the virtual machines. We think more about the services and how those work. We assume that the machine is just there for us. Like we don't care about the database server. We want to know about the database instance, for example, if you talk to database, or just actually the API endpoint. And you can, of course, even in the cloud, do VMs if you want to. But if you do, I will almost argue that you're doing it wrong, and you should think like, should we do it differently? But at least that's a step maybe in the right direction. I'm not 100% sure about that actually, but it's a step. And this leads us to Pulumi. Like how do we manage all these services? Like we have serverless functions, we have serverless sort of databases almost. We have Kubernetes on one end, and all these different things. How do we manage this in an effective manner? And this is where I think that tool like Pulumi comes in. And there are, of course, options, which I will talk about later, but this is the sweet spot for Pulumi to administrate all these different cloud providers. It's not just only like Azure and Kubernetes and GCP. We have also like GitHub, we have automation, operation, logging, monitoring. All these different services are things we want to provision and administrate in a good way. We are not doing all of that yet, but hopefully we'll reach that point at some point. So using Pulumi's words, it's modern infrastructure as code, where you can create, deploy, and manage infrastructure on any cloud, depending on which cloud, but most of the clouds at least, and using familiar programming language and tools. And familiar, that depends on your background, of course. For the developer, you have a lot of choices. You can do TypeScript, Java, .NET, Go, and Python. Did I miss something? I'm not sure. But you can do, there should be something there that you can actually use, I hope. But I would like to change this to modern infrastructure as software. And I think even some people at Pulumi has also mentioned that this would be software maybe. And the reason for this is I think programming with Pulumi is a first-class citizen. For most other infrastructure as code provider is mainly sort of like Terraform has its HCL, which is almost YAML and all static declarative. You have some small programming construct, but you don't have a full programming language to back things up with. And as a developer, you get a lot of familiar concepts using Pulumi. You have loops, you have conditionals, classes or types, and you can also do like custom calls based on different results when you're provisioning things. And the concrete example of the last thing that we used is, for example, when you want to create an Azure AD SPA application. That's basically how you register a SPA application for authentication. You can't do that with a provider in Pulumi. You can't do that with a Terraform provider either, because that's not in the official ARM API today. It's in the beta release, I think, how you do that. But with Pulumi, you can actually start by provisioning the Azure AD application as a regular AD application, and then when it's done, you can trigger a web request to sort of patch your AD application to create or modify that to be a SPA. It's a sort of a hack, but it's a hack you need to do if you want to do that. And then it's better to do it in your process than doing it sort of outside of your deployment, I would say. So if you would do it in something else, you need to deploy it first, and then when all the deployment is finished, you would run an extra script to actually do the patching. Now I get to do that in the same place. Yeah. And also talk about infrastructure as code. There's imperative and declarative coding styles of it, of course. And a concrete example of imperative style is based when you're running a series of bash script. That's what I've been doing for a lot of my deployment before I started using Pulumi. And the first example here, that's how you create the resource group using the Azure CLI. And this below is how you do it in Pulumi. Of course, it might seem like more code for the Pulumi stuff, or it doesn't seem like it is more code in that example. But you get a lot more in this case. For the imperative style, you haven't declared on what should you do if you change a resource group. How do you do deletion? How do you do modification and things like that? That's something you need to sort of implement yourself if you're doing an imperative style infrastructure as code. But with a declarative style that you have at Pulumi here, I'm just saying this is what I want, and then Pulumi needs to figure it out. And and Pulumi is also storing some kind of state. So if I would delete this sort of resource in my Pulumi program, Pulumi would actually figure out, okay, this thing is deleted, I'm going to remove it. And that will I can't just delete the first line and then have the command line figure out that I deleted it. Like you have to write something, delete it if you're doing it imperatively. I'm not saying like imperative is bad and declarative is good. That's not the point at all. Like imperative style might definitely be good for if you want to try something out fast on any cloud. Of course, you can use an imperative style to spin up a new resource group or whatever. But if you have a large environment, then I do think a declarative approach is definitely better. But I'm not saying like imperative style is definitely something I use almost every day as well. So why Pulumi? I don't think that's the solution to everything. It's my tool of choice, and hopefully some other people as well. I do think you should take infrastructure as code seriously, of course. And if you do that, I think you're doing it right, no matter which tool you're choosing. But I'm here to talk about Pulumi, so let's look into why I landed on Pulumi and what I think is good about it. These are some of the options I consider, or I did actually consider the AVS part. I threw it in there just to show that it's something for AVS. And I didn't consider it because I was interested in Azure. So AWS CDK was sort of out of the question right away for me, because, yeah, again, not Azure. But I also want to use Kubernetes. So that means both ARM and the Bicep, which is the sort of ARM thing on the right, is also out of the question, since they are only targeting Azure. So that's good. I can sort of remove them without even looking at how they sort of work. So that left me with Pulumi and Terraform. And when I started using Pulumi, Terraform hadn't released their cloud development kit, which they have released now. I haven't looked at that. But back in the day, you had to write HCL, which is their HashiCorp language or something. And I was never too fond of that at all. Like if Pulumi didn't exist, I would probably go with Terraform. But when I had the option to actually use a proper programming language, then I thought that was a no-brainer. So I started actually under my paternity leave to play with Pulumi and F#, because I like F# as well. It was quite a fun experience, and that's helped me bring it also to the company where I work today. Yeah, and I want to choose between Pulumi and Terraform, the coding aspect. Like, I like code much more than I like YAML, and I guess that's probably talking to 95% of developers, if not more. So that left me with only Pulumi. Yeah, so the main reasons is I want support for Azure and Kubernetes. Programming as a first-class citizen is not an afterthought, as it is with other languages. And also the good coverage of the APIs. And that's also something I would like to mention. Like the Azure provider that you have in Pulumi, that's automatically generated based on the ARM API, which basically means it supports everything that you have in ARM. And there are also examples of Pulumi sort of releasing functions before they've been announced by Microsoft, because they are actually adding it to the preview APIs, and then they get pulled into the Azure provider before they announced it. So the coverage is definitely there. Then you can argue, okay, do you have as many providers as Terraform has? And probably not, but do you need to have 1,000 providers? I think most people are happy if you have like GCP, AWS, Azure, GitHub, and all these larger vendors. That would probably be sufficient for most people. So those are the main reasons that I think I choose Pulumi. So some of the concepts you need to know about for Pulumi. First, we have the project. That's basically where you put all your things into. It's like a container, if you like. Inside a project, you have your program. That's your code that you write. Something in my throat. And the program, they define different resources. And that can be anything from like a password to a user to a VM to whatever. So everything you can imagine for that you want to provision. And the resources are defined using inputs, and they also emit sort of outputs. And inputs, outputs are special types in Pulumi. They help you to sort of figure out dependencies and which order things should be deployed. So they are resolved runtime. So an input or string is not the same thing as a string, but it will be resolved runtime. And you can pass outputs as inputs to the next resource. And then we have stacks. You can almost think of stacks as an independent and isolated instance of your program. It has its own configuration. It has its own output, whether the program has run, etc. And you can have how many of them as you like. We'll probably see that in the example if I get there. Yeah, and they can have both like configuration variables and also the outputs from your deployment. And you can also connect stacks to each other, which is really powerful. So then you can have like a core infrastructure project, and then you can have other stack reference that core infrastructure and using the outputs from the other, from each other. So some components we have is the runtime and engine. That's basically how you run. You have the the CLI and the Go engine that do all the things or the magical parts. We have the different plugins, which could be a native install thing that your code is talking to through the engine somehow. And the SDK is what you use to actually write your programs. And then we also have the state, storage, and secret management. And the secret management is really good in Pulumi. You get it sort of out of the box, and you can have it as a configuration variables that have, you can store them as a secret, then you can have output as secret, and they are encrypted, and you need to have access to either the Pulumi service or the encryption key, depending on how you do it. And also the state, storage, and secret can be stored either locally on the Pulumi service or on Azure or AWS or something else. That's up to you. Since Pulumi is open source, but they do provide a Pulumi service that you might need to pay for. And that leads us to the demo. So this is what I would like to show today. The black boxes, that's my Pulumi projects. I'm going to have one thing called environments. That could be seen as like a core infrastructure project, if you like. That's going to deploy only one thing, or an environment, meaning an Azure resource group, and it also provision credentials for that resource group that we can use to deploy other things in that resource group. And those credentials will be made available as an output when I run the environments program. And then I can actually reference those credentials from my deploy program. And they're going to use that to deploy my application, which basically means blob storage hosting a simple HTML page, which is my application. And I also show how to use another provider, which is the DN Simple provider, to hook up the DNS and point to my blob storage and have a nicer URL. So let's get started. Let's keep changes. Oh. So let me. I first think I should show us how to get started with. Let me move away. Yeah, how to get started with Pulumi. I have prepared other folder where I will work later on, but I will show how to get started first. I have already used the Pulumi login, which is what you use to log in with the CLI. Of course, you need to install the CLI first, which is a one-line command. But then to create a new project, you just do pulumi.new, and now you get a delete me. I'm not sure if I should install the new version, but how you get a lot of different options and templates already for you. I know which one I would like to use, so then I can actually write Pulumi new TypeScript. And now I can call delete me, and yes, and have a stack name called dev. And now I have a program almost ready. And let's see what that looks like. So when you have a new completely blank project, that's how I usually start. Templates are good to get started, but when you do something, then you might want to start blank and pull in the parts you actually want to use. But you get these standard node files for package and package.json to see your dependencies. Then we had the Pulumi file, which actually just named the project, defines which runtime you're using. I'm using Node in this case, since it's a TypeScript thing. And then you have the thing you want to do. I'm not going to do a lot of here because I want to use the other project that I prepared. But for example, if I want to create an output, I can do hello world. Pulumi up, and that's how you. Pulumi up says, okay, take my program, run it, and deploy it. And in my case, I don't deploy anything, but I do have a stack now, and that stack will have an output with the world, the hello output variable, and the value world. And for use configs, which I also think is good to show in this small kind of example, you can do create a config by using Pulumi config, set message, which is the key, and then you have the value, YOLO. And now I can read my config, const config, and config require message. And now if I do Pulumi, I will do -y, so I don't have to answer yes myself in the interactive part. So now I should get a YOLO message, which you see here in the diff. And I think that's finished. And also said that the secret management is quite good. When I did create my config, I got this Pulumi dev YAML file, and here you see my message. If I want this to be a secret, I would just do -- secret when I set the variable, and now you see this change right away. And I can't read this. And I think you can't either. But how does this work now when I run the thing again? So one gotcha in that you need to be aware of when using secrets like this. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, this will actually show me Pulumi stack. And here you see the value, which means it sort of worked, but at the same time, I have said it is a secret, so why do I see it as clear text? And to do that, you actually need to do a require secret instead. And now if I do that one change, so I need to Pulumi up. Yeah, so now I won't be able to see my thing if I am explicit about it. So now you see the value is set as a secret, and to be able to see the secret, I can actually pass in show secrets. And since I'm logged in with my account, I can decrypt it because I'm talking to the service, and now I can actually get the value. So the secret management here is really, really good and well thought through. So this was the simple part. So let's go to the somewhat more complex. I will first remove this. So I can just do a destroy, which basically removes all the resources that you have provisioned, which is good for cleaning up and saving money. Yeah, and then I also want to remove the stack. So here is my slightly more complex example. I have my application, which is an index.html file, also known as a web page. And this is what I want to deploy. I have my Pulumi folder as something I created. I created 2 different projects in Pulumi. One is called environments, as I said in the slides, and one is the deploy, which is the deployment of the application. And in here, I already installed a couple of packages. One is the Azure Native. This could take a couple of minutes to install. That's why I actually did it beforehand. But this gives me access to all the Azure APIs. Then we have the Azure AD package, which gives me access to all the Azure AD stuff. It's not the same. It's not the same API, which is sort of annoying sometimes, but that's how it is. And that's not because of Pulumi. That's how Azure is structured. And then we have the standard Pulumi package and also a random package, which I'm going to use to create a random UID that is the same between different runs, which is something you often would like to do. You can also use that random package to create random passwords and such, etc. So let's see what happens if I deploy this one. I will go into make this cd Pulumi environment, Pulumi up. Actually, I want first to actually work with Azure. You need to do a couple of things. Either you can use the login account as you are as a user. I don't think that's. I'd rather use a service principal. So I'm going to show you quickly how to set up a service principal. And to do that, I have actually prepared a small script here that will first do some housekeeping and clean up. If I have an NDC 2022 God principle, that will actually be, I will find that and delete it. Then I will create a new service principal in this command here and read out the result using this subscription ID. And then I'm setting these environment variables, and those are used later by my Azure provider in Pulumi to talk to Azure. And they will read the result and parse out the application ID, the password, the subscription ID, something I set. They'll also read out the tenant ID. And then I'm adding the permissions I need, which is basically to create Azure AD applications. And I do have a nice sleep here because of timing issues in Azure. I hope 15 seconds is enough today. It wasn't yesterday, but I don't want to wait too long either. And I also want to give my, I think this is actually contributor, access administrator, so I can administrate access to my resources. I need to give that role as well. So to do all this, I need to source the file, scripts, yeah, so now I'm cleaning up and I'm creating a service principal. It will now warn me because I'm giving out quite a lot of access to this role, but I think that's fine. This is my God account, if you like. And now it's setting up the permission. So now I have my service principal quite soon that I can use to talk to Azure, which is good. Yeah, so here's the 15 seconds delay. For some reason it stopped or failed. I know, maybe it is because I should be logged in. Let's run again. This is another 15 seconds. I think this will actually still save me time of compared to doing it manually. So here's also one of the script you're seeing here. That's sort of part of imperative style of infrastructure as code, I would say. I'm creating my service principal in imperative style because it's often needed to do that at least once, some point. Either you do it manually by clicking in the UI, or you need to do it in imperative style. You can't do everything in a declarative fashion. You have to sort of start somewhere. And this is what I do here. I start by creating myself a service principal. So now I have my service principal. And now I can actually use that. I don't need to specify anything because I'm setting the environment variables. They will be picked up by Pulumi. So I don't need to do anything more than that, actually. So if I do Pulumi up now, I hope, so create a new stack. I will create a dev stack. And now we get the preview saying, okay, here's a storage account and a resource group that I'm going to create. So let's do that. So we can see the next part of demo to show a diffing part, which I think is pretty cool as well. And you can also follow along on the live part of the deployment all the time. So here I'm on the service, so I can see that it is creating and it's orange here, so when it's turned green, so now it's finished. So you have you can both see in the UI and also in the console. And here you see also the output, so I can use this to actually connect to my storage account. It should probably not be public, it should probably be a secret. That should probably be part of the template, I think, in my opinion. Yeah. So the next part, if I want to start getting closer to what I want to do, which is creating the resource group with the service principal. But first, I would like to show like how you can use, since you have the full power of a programming language, you can do things like this, which is quite nice. And I do think this is a definitely relevant thing, that you can actually do things in an array, because you might want to, let's say, have a list of DNS records, and then you want to specify them and then have one construct to create all these DNS records. Instead of doing it 10 times, you can just provide an array. When you have this previous step in Pulumi, you can also look at the details. That will show you exactly what will happen. So here I can see that, okay, I will create a lot of resource groups, 10 of them, I guess. And I will remove this output and also all the other things. Let's do that. Because it will show one one other thing I would like to show. This will soon be created, so while we're waiting for that to be created, let's head over to the Azure portal. And I will show you one thing. So here's my demo subscription. And looking at the resource groups here, they have a pretty weird name. So what I said was, okay, I want to have a resource group. This should be, or this is what maybe you think should be the name, like the resource group 1 and something else. But what Pulumi does, it's actually append. You can see I have the 1, 2, 3, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I have something random in the end. And that's a feature, not a bug. But there is ways to override that if you know you want to do it. So for a resource group, you can actually do it like this instead, MP2, I think. So now I'm putting the resource group name, and then as argument, I'm setting resource group name to be RG name. And if I do Pulumi up now, do a -y to be a bit faster, I will change the name to be something else. And this might take not too long time. That's why I'm using resource groups. But the UI in Azure is actually eventually consistent. So it might take a little bit more time, even though it says it's finished. Doesn't yet, but it's getting there. Come on. Try again in this view. Yeah, here come all the resource group, and it takes a while before the other one gets deleted. So that's how you control the exact names of resource groups, and that applies to a lot of other resources. It might not, it's not consistent the property for that, because that depends on the kind of resource you are provisioning, of course. And you can also use config variables, but looking at time, I don't think I'm going to show how to read the config variable, because that's the same thing as I did in the last sample. You can set a config variable, and then you can use that to define your name. If you want to do that for, let's say you have another stack, you can set the different config variable in that stack and deploy it. So let's get started with actually creating the web or the resource group with service principal. And for that, I will create a resource group with service principal.ts, and here I will create a component that I can use. This is the start of my component, so I will just start there to make sure that it actually works. And now I can do MB5. So let's get back here. So here I am creating First, a set of arguments that I would like to as input to my component. This is a custom component I create that doesn't exist already in Pulumi. And I'm extending the component resource, which is something I get from the SDK. And now I need to call the parent constructor to register this with this name, basically, and also provide it with my name additional. So here's the type, and that's the name. And to use this component, I use it exactly as I would with other resources in Pulumi. So I just said resource group with service principal, and I'm passing in the name, and then also passing in some other things that I will use later. And I can actually create, even though this doesn't contain anything, I can run up now, and it should clean up all the other resource groups and actually create this sort of empty component, which is almost magical. But while it's cleaning up and creating that, let's go and add some stuff here. I have prepared so that I didn't type anything. So here's the full component. I will explain why this looks like it does and how the different concept works here. So the first part is what you saw before. I can remove the side part here and also do like that. So, and I'm first creating my component, registering that with the sort of the parent. Then I'm reading out and creating my different options. One is for Azure AD and one is for Azure. And that's why I can actually provide this component with different providers. I need to figure that out, which make this component much more reusable. So I can package it up and ship to another project if I want to. And I'm reading out the Azure native and also Azure AD from the providers list here and setting my provider to that. And also setting the parent to be this, which is a pretty nice feature that I will show you later, that will give you a much nicer sort of graphical representation of your resources. Then I create my resource group using the Azure options. I'm creating an AD application using my Azure AD options. And this is something you just need to do to create an Azure AD and service principal. And then I'm creating my service principal, providing it with my application ID. I'm creating a password, which is the password that you need to use to authenticate with this service principal. And then I'm reading out the name from the resource group. And this apply part here is because the name here is, you can see it says any, but it's actually an output of string. It's TypeScript not playing nice with me. So it's an output of type string. And to read that value and to give it some meaning, I need to call apply on that thing. So an output can be seen as a promise, basically. And apply is basically then in the node world. So I think apply, and then I can access the real value. And now I can create, using that name, I can generate the URN, meaning the string that identifies this resource in Azure. And then I can have that. So this is also of type output, even though TypeScript doesn't tell you that now. That's how it is with TypeScript sometimes. I don't have to do the same thing here because the subscription here is type string. Yeah. And here I have the random package, which I told about. So this is the way to create a random UID. And this will be the same between different runs, which is not how UIDs usually work, but in this case, that's something I want. I want to be unique, but it should be generated and controlled by me. And you need that to actually create this role assignment, which basically gives my service principal contributor rights in my resource group. And then I'm setting these output variables, which will be then something I can access from my component, which I will show in the index file. So let's use this component. That should be MP7. It's not that much more advanced than before. I'm creating my two different providers, my Azure provider and Azure AD provider. I'm instantiating them here now to have a more consistent behavior between runs. Since now I'm giving them a specific name, otherwise they might be not, like if you're running it locally or on your build pipeline, this is something you want to do. to be explicit of the providers you're using. But they will still use the default credentials that are in my environment variables. But you can also provide the credentials here as options here. But I don't do that here in this case. Then I actually have an array of hello NDC only. That's just to show I could create multiple resource groups, just providing many different names here. So it could be a way, like if you have different teams. This is actually how we do it by using Pulumi automation, which I had a talk on last year. But here you can actually provide many different names, so each team can basically get its own resource group and with their own credentials. But in this case, I'm only creating one, and then I'm just creating the resource groups and then outputting from this map function here in JavaScript. I'm outputting the different relevant things I need as output. So if I do a Pulumi map on this now, I hope to get a resource group with a service principal. And I could actually, if I want to, actually log out from my, I'm logged in now on the Azure portal as well, or Azure CLI. I could log out, but this will still work because I have set the environment variables. So it's a good way of actually make sure that you are having the right permissions on the users doing the thing in the clouds. So you don't want to just use sort of administrative account locally, and then when you do in the build pipeline, nothing works because you're not using your local account. So it's really good to use this service principal and set the right permissions on those. So here you can see that I have created some things. Let's look at it in the cloud and see what it looks like. I only have a dev stack for this project and this, and here you can see that my client secret is indeed encrypted, which is good, so I can read it. If I go into resources, you can see everything that has been deployed, and also have the graphical representation of it. And here you see the effect of the parent property. Since I had a parent property, if I zoom in here you see my type, Tomas components resource group with SP, and hello NDC is the name. And everything here is using an option that has a parent to this, which was referring to this instance over here. So here you can actually get a pretty good graphical overview if you have a larger environment. So let's get to the next or last part where I want to deploy my actual application to this resource group. So go to deploy. The first thing I would like to do in here is to create a website thingy, a website component. And I think I have create website. So same concept as for the resource group with a service principal. I'm creating a website which extends the component resource. I'm giving that a type as well and also the name. I'm adding some providers. In this case, I have the Azure options. I have the simple options. This doesn't have a provider since I'm using as the default because I'm a little bit lazy with this part. Like this you can see. I know this will be the static host name because that's apparently what it becomes. I was trying actually to resolve that, but it didn't work because it would be like a catch-22, like what was created first, either like the blob storage or the DNS record. You need to have one of them first. So I just hard-coded this and using the storage account name. And now I can use that to create the DNS record at dnsimple. And that's a C name pointing to this static web host name. And I have a delay custom domain name here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be, even though the provider reported it is finished, it might not have been updated in all the registries and everywhere. So I want to make sure that this DNS entry will actually point to where I want to point when I try to provision the parts on Azure. So I have using my output here, and then creating a new output, but I'm waiting like 10 seconds before that to happen. It's sort of a hack, but it works most of the time. It hasn't failed yet, so it should probably fails today. And then I was creating the storage account. I'm not going to go into detail about all the different properties here, because that's not the what I'm hoping to teach here. That's Azure specific. Like the concept here in Pulumi is you create a resource with a storage account and providing it different arguments. And this is something you can look up what these arguments should be. That's more Azure specific than Pulumi specific. And here I also said that this should actually, even though I don't use anything from the DNS record, which I define up here, I want the DNS record to be provisioned first. So you can add explicit dependencies here. And then I'm creating this static website saying what I should serve. And then I'm uploading my files using also, so I can manage files also with Pulumi as a resource. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. And then I'm just exposing this endpoint. And if I want to use this, that should be use website. It's not too complicated either. I have the most interesting part here is actually this. Here I have a thing called get environment, but I'm referencing my previous project and previous track. That has a reference to the resource group, and the name here is the name hello NDC. And I'm not sure if you noticed that, but going back to this stack output, you can see this is a resource group and the property hello NDC. So by reference to that, I will get this as an output. So now I can use this to read my environment and then create my Azure provider. And that's a way to sort of control the access for my resource group in a quite effective manner, I would say. And this is something we are actually doing, but using automation API, as I mentioned. So here doing getting the environment, then I call it the get Azure provider using the environment, and that basically sets up all the subscriptions. So here you see how I'm creating the Azure provider programmatically using the different values. And then I'm just using and creating my website that I defined before, which has resource group name, the DNS arguments, and then I'm just defining which providers to use. So if I do a Pulumi up here, and while that's running, this what I do to deploy is to this page here, just to show it is empty. They're not cheating. So it should go pretty fast. That's a good part. We are doing storage account and files. It doesn't take too long time to deploy. And the DNS should also be somewhat fast. So this was as a preview, telling you, okay, all these things will happen. And I will have an output here saying that this is site URL. And this is the one I showed you. So now, things are getting created, which is good. The DNS was really fast, and the storage account is what takes the longest. And the name for the site is actually using the stack name. So in this case, it's a dev. So the name will be hello NDC-dev, and that's why we have the site. I want to show you why that is soon. And now it's almost finished. There we go. So let's do a refresh, and you can see my amazing web skills, hopefully. No! It should work. Do I have Wi-Fi connection? I should, otherwise Pulumi wouldn't work. This definitely worked yesterday. Okay, let's take this one and see if that works. Oh, so this is it's deployed, but the DNS is still not picking it up for some reason, and that could be just DNS issues. Isn't that always the issue? And this is the page I deployed. And if I want to create a different version of this, all I need to do is Pulumi stack init, create test, and now I have another stack called test. This is that the stack name is going to be used in deployment. I can do Pulumi up, yes, and that will actually create now a completely new site, while hopefully this one should work. I guess it's something on D and simple, I'm not sure why. Oh yeah, and this is missing a, I need to have the location in my stack, so Pulumi config set Azure native, that's location, West Europe. And now I should deploy my second version of application in my test environment, which is basically the same resource group, but now I have a different name. Maybe I'll have more luck with the test URL and DNS. I'm not sure what that could be. It should be HTTPS. And go on. And I said, like, this website sort of component I created now is also something like I can package up and you can use it in different teams. So if you have a sort of a standard of how you're deploying applications, you can easily create components of that and distribute. And how to do that, that sort of usually depends on how you want to do it. Do you want to share the code only, or do you want to package it up as an NPM package or whatnot? That's really up to you and how you like to share these kind of things. I think I'll look into why my DNS didn't work. This has worked every time this week. See if this is almost finished. Open. Yeah, this is more like it. I don't have a proper TLS certificate. So now I actually set it up on my D and simple as well with this proper TLS, proper URL. So I think that's what I have time for. I said it was time for questions, so I have 2 minutes. But don't be a stranger if you have any. Just take them afterwards or in the hallway track if you want to. I think that's it.